maybe you already said this, Miss Benzie, but if your junior is like near and they want to come on screen and say hi, we just miss your kids a lot. So, you can
Oh
lure them close.
no, Mama.
Yes, Chris Ram. Hi, nice to see you.
Hi.
I get so excited when I get a few sightings.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Ms. Mills, are you joining just to be here and answer questions and say hi, or do you have anything that you want to share before I get started?
Nope, just here to support and listen and answer questions.
Okay, cool. That's great. Great to have you. All right. So I think we still have a couple of people joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and get started anyway, just to respect people's time. I also know that there's a PTA meeting at 7 o'clock, and I don't know how many of you are transitioning over to that, but I want to be cognizant of your need to get to another meeting. So I'll go ahead and get started. All right, now while I'm screen sharing, it is hard for me to see faces. And so if anyone has a question and drops it in the chat bar, I might not see it. Or if anyone does like a raised hand thing, I also might not see it. So Ms. Mills, if you want to alert me since you're here anyway. But also, like I said, feel free to just, turn off your mute button and speak, because I like hearing voices. And can folks see? I'm trying to get into like presentation mode, but can people see the presentation and the slides?
Yeah,
Yeah, I can see the slides.
You go to the top right, present. I think it might, for everyone's screen, put us over there.
I had to move everyone's faces out of the way so that I can do that. Okay. Good. Can everyone see? Is it coming in larger? Okay. Great. All right. So we did the introduction, right? The one thing I didn't see a lot of are questions that people hope are answered during today's meeting. I will set aside some time at the end to answer the questions that do come up. So if there's anything that you were really hoping I would address and I don't, please, at the end of the meeting, I have set aside some time to go over questions. My hope is that I will anticipate everything you want to know, and all of the questions that you have in mind, we will address. But if we don't, you can always ask me. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just start with like the
Real
basics.
quick, Ms. Benzie, sorry to interrupt. I think your presenter view might be over your slides.
Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah,
no, that's okay.
That looks great.
Oh, I was hoping just I could see that. Okay. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just start with some basic information about what the SATs are and ACTs, what they are and why the students need them. I just want to say that with the caveat that the pieces of information I'm about to give you are really based on a traditional year where COVID is not a factor, and I'm going to address how COVID has impacted some of the information I'm about to give you. But I do just want to start with like, what have the SATs meant for students in the past and how have they impacted the college application process in the past? So standardized tests in general are these universal exams. I think the idea was originally born out of this idea that we have students from 50 different states, and even students from different countries who are applying to colleges in the United States. And they're coming from different high schools that have different grading policies that offer different courses. And it was an attempt to standardize some of the data that colleges are receiving from students when they apply. So everyone who takes the SATs takes them on the same day and takes the same exam in the same amount of time. And the thinking behind that is that that somehow provides a universal basis for, for how well students did on this test. That is not necessarily like my saying that the test does that or necessarily does that fairly, but that is sort of like the idea behind these standardized tests. And students in high school really have two options. They have the SAT or the ACTs. It used to be the case that the ACTs were more traditionally taken in the Midwest and the SATs were more common on the East and West coasts. We have gotten to the point where they are sort of interchangeable exams. Colleges do not have a preference and they will accept either or. So students should feel free to choose between either the SATs or the ACTs. Our students are likely much more familiar with the SATs. They took a PSAT last year. It's still more commonly taken, even though it's not necessarily preferred. So from that perspective, the majority of our students will go on to take the SATs, but they could take the ACTs if they preferred. The ACTs is a science reading section. That's really the main difference between the two. They're both timed tests, and they're both testing students on similar skills. So, that's kind of like the basics between the SAT and the ACT. And then traditionally, what I would say is how many times should students test? And I would say ideally 2. They could even test more than 2 times, but it's always great to see students take that test more than once. Sometimes the first time they take the test, they are nervous, or they're just sort of unprepared for what it's like to sit for that 3.5-hour exam, and testing a second time can be beneficial. It also allows students to see how they scored, maybe where they want to improve, and then to do some preparation before retaking. And colleges will accept the highest scores, even across 2 different exams. So if a student were to take the test in April and do really well on the evidence-based reading and writing section, but not as well on math, and then spend some time studying and preparing, and then brings up their math score a couple of months later, but then for whatever reason, the reading score goes down, colleges will take the higher reading score from the original exam and then the higher math score from the second exam, and they will do what's known as a super score and give students credit for their best work. So it always benefits students to take it more than once, usually. I do understand that there are like some public health things to consider. There may be people in the household, for whom you're worried about physical health and COVID. And so I think this year is a little bit different. Like I said, this information is really based on like a traditional year. So we'll talk about the impact that COVID has had on some of the information I just provided you. And I'll just take a pause for a second to see if there are any questions about the information we just covered before I move on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that because, oh yeah, you went to the next slide. It was about that, about how many colleges are becoming test optional, and like how that's affected like the college application and acceptances, whether it's become more competitive or less competitive now that people have the option not to turn in their SATs.
Okay, perfect. That's where we're going. So that's a great question. Thank you. And a natural extension, I think, of the conversation. So in a pre-COVID, in PC times, there were still schools that were moving towards this idea of being testing optional. So it's ramped up a lot because of COVID, but even prior to that, we were seeing more and more colleges move in the direction of becoming what is known as testing optional. I think a lot of that has to do with the question around whether these standardized tests are really doing what they were designed to do or what they were intended to do, whether they're equitable, and whether they're helpful for colleges in terms of making admissions decisions. So even prior to COVID, we've seen a lot of schools move in the direction of becoming testing optional. So we could just start with like, what does testing optional mean? Testing optional means exactly what it sounds like. It means that it is a student's choice whether they wish to send in their SAT scores or not. So if a student does well on the test, feels like it represents them well, feels like it paints their application in a strong light, they may send in their scores. On the other hand, if a student feels like their test scores are a weakness in their application, does not represent who they are as a student, or the student doesn't want to share it for other reasons, they can opt not to send in their SAT scores. So that's what it means for a school to be testing optional. It is optional for your scores to be included in your admissions file. A couple of things to know about making a choice to be testing optional. With no test scores to share with colleges, often more weight is going to be placed on other components of the application. So they have less information about the student, therefore they're going to place more weight on other components of the application, such as the student's transcript that represents the classes that they have taken while in high school and the grades that they have earned. The essay that students will write, which is a personal statement. They tell a story about themselves. It helps the colleges to get to know them a bit better. Their letters of recommendation, which come from a teacher who can speak to who that student is in the classroom. And then a list of activities or the things they choose to do outside of being a student in high school. Later on in the spring, I will have a longer, more in-depth college meeting where we talk about the other components of the application. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time speaking about those now, but when you do choose to be testing optional, schools are going to look at those components a little bit more heavily than they would were they to have test scores. So that's kind of like, to summarize the testing optional situation. Now, what happened in 2021, and this was, particularly important for our current seniors because they actually had the ability to take an SAT at Mel's, I think like 2 weeks before we had to shut down for COVID. And so students did have one test score under their belt. But that was really only true of New York City students because school test day is not a thing everywhere in New York, and it's certainly not a thing everywhere in the United States. So there were many, many students who didn't get to take the SATs at all in their junior year. And then, they did come back in the fall of student senior years and students could take them, but they were operating, all of the testing sites were operating with limited capacity because they had to distance the students and adhere to all of the public health guidelines. So they had fewer seats to offer. And it was very difficult for some students to get places to test. So schools had to respond by revamping their policies around requiring SAT scores because it was so challenging for many students to take the test even once, let alone twice. And it was happening under the backdrop of a national pandemic, which obviously impacted students in so many different ways. So what I have seen for this year's admission cycle is that most schools have moved towards being testing optional. So some of the colleges that our students frequently apply to include the CUNY schools. Those are the City University of New York system, and include some schools you may have heard of like Hunter, Queens College, Baruch, Queensboro, City College. So all of those public schools in New York City actually adopted a test blind policy, which is a little bit different from testing optional. What testing blind means is that they will not look at test scores, even if the student chooses to send them. So CUNY took it a step further and said, don't send us your SAT scores. We don't want to see them. We're not going to consider them in our admissions decision. As far as what the outcome of that decision has been, I really have yet to collect that data because students are still in the process of applying and hearing back from schools. I do think that what we're going to see is that we have an uptick in students who are getting into some of the more competitive CUNY schools. I'm going to use Hunter as an example. Because in previous years, their average admitted student had like a 1250 on the SATs and higher. Without that requirement, we are seeing students whose GPAs put them into range, but whose SAT scores might not have, get into Hunter, whereas in a previous year, their SAT scores may have disqualified them. So I believe, although the data is not entirely in yet, that we are going to see an uptick in students who are being admitted to some of the more competitive CUNY schools as a result of the test blind policy. And I will know more about where we stand later in the year. So hopefully when I hold the sort of like more in-depth college admissions evening, I will have collected more data. Like I said, at this point, we have seniors who are still applying, and admissions decisions are really just starting to trickle in now.
Ms. Bensby, there's a question in the chat just from folks who are wondering if the test blind policy, I think you're about to get there, but whether the test blind policy will apply for this year's students during their application process next year.
Yeah, the answer is, like, I have my next bullet is what do we predict for 2022. So I'll get to that in a minute. But the reality is that like anything I say now is my prediction. I don't think schools have set their policies in stone yet. I think a lot of schools are waiting to see how this new policy shakes out for them, whether it's effective, whether they feel like they're able to admit a class of students that they'd like to admit. And if it works for them, we are likely to see the policy extend. I think it also depends on whether students are able to take SATs this year, whether there are cancellations, whether we continue to see testing centers operate at capacity and not be able to register students. So I don't have a definitive answer to that yet. What I can say is that a lot of private schools that opted to be test optional this year have emailed and said that they're going to extend that policy into next year's admissions cycle. So I think it's likely we will see a repeat of the policies from this year, but I don't have a definitive answer about that yet. Then you've got your SUNY system. So those are the public colleges that are in other parts of New York State that tend to be for students who want to have a residential on-campus experience where they are living away. They adopted a testing optional policy, so it was up to the applicant if they wanted to submit their scores or not. Students could choose to submit their SAT scores to some schools and not to others, depending on how well they matched up with different schools' requirements, because there is no universal this is a good grade on the exam. It really depends on how you compare to the average admitted student at different campuses. But SUNY did choose to go testing optional. And then for all other campuses, most of them are testing optional. I've seen very, very few exceptions, and usually for specialty programs within the campus. But by and large, schools are testing optional this year, and many of our students have chosen to apply as testing optional candidates. And like I said, the jury is out on how exactly that's impacted our applicants, but hopefully later on in the spring, I'll have a little bit more data to share with everybody. So if there are any other questions about testing optional, I'll take another pause. I'll have a sip of water, and please let me know if there's anything I can answer.
I put some questions in the chat, but I mean, I don't think these first two questions asked because they're just about like a digital SAT exam. So, and I like, in my mom, I had an email talking about like the SATs actually being in person, which I'll still take more than the digital exam.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my questions are: what resources can be used to help study for the exam? How does grading or knowingly scoring work on the SAT exam? What grade is considered a passing or failing for the SAT exam? When will I be able to access my score on the pre-SAT exam I took in 10th grade? Should I reach out to certain teachers to understand how to solve problems in the SAT exam, like algebra? And then someone else asks this question: should I realistically take the SAT if it is optional for the college I plan to apply to?
So many good questions. I'm trying to figure where to start so that it's organized. You know what I might ask you to do, because those are really good and valid and important questions, and I want to make sure they get answered. But what I might ask you to do is just wait until we get to the end of the presentation. Let's see how many of those we cover, and then anything we don't cover, I would really like it if you would raise those questions back up, because I think probably everyone that's here would like the answers to everything you just said.
Tommy, those are great questions. There's one more in here that might be relevant to now, Ms. Bensby, which is, can folks see what schools see tests versus don't see tests? You know what I mean? Like, is there a way for them to know that that are not in the SUNY or CUNY system?
Yeah, so I used to refer everyone to a website called FAIR Test, FAIR. So it's fairtest.org, and I can put that in the chat bar. That used to be a great place to go. You can list colleges alphabetically, or you can list them by state. And that was an accounting of everyone who was testing optional. But that list seems to be relevant for schools who chose to be testing optional outside of this sort of like COVID policy. I don't know that that's the best website to look at for all of the schools that have moved into a temporary testing optional phase as a result of COVID. I honestly think it's safe to assume that the school you are applying to is testing optional. I haven't seen schools require it. So I think it's fairly safe to assume that schools are going to be testing optional. Without necessarily needing to look it up. And if you're someone who's planning to apply into a specialized program, like you're looking to apply into a program that sees you through your bachelor's degree and a doctorate of medicine, or you're looking to apply into, a bachelor's master's degree, like an accelerated program, then it might be worth reaching out to schools that you're interested in to ask. But I would say that almost everybody is testing optional with very few to no exceptions. And so it's safe to make that assumption.
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So my daughter's a junior. So just to clarify, she has to take the SATs this coming spring, but it's up based on her scoring. She can submit those results to the college if they're testing optional, but she still has to take the SATs.
Okay, so that's a good clarifying question. She does not have to take the SATs. It's not mandatory. It's optional, and I think that'll be a little bit more clear in this next slide. I'm going to talk about opportunities to test, but students do not have to. They can certainly choose not to, and I think particularly if anyone feels like it would not be safe for the student's health or for anyone at home's health, students can choose not to sit for the test. Colleges really won't know whether students are not sharing their SAT scores because they weren't happy with them, or because they didn't feel like it was safe to take them, or because they just don't feel, some students choose not to send SAT scores because they just don't feel like, those scores are a fair representation of them as a student or a person. Students cannot take the SATs or not share the SAT scores for all of those reasons. So no, it's not mandatory for students to sit for the exam. However, if students choose to sit for the exam and they're not happy with how they do, they can also choose not to send their scores in. So they wouldn't be harmed by sitting for a test, even if they were disappointed with the results, because they could always choose to apply as a testing optional candidate. So there's going to be multiple opportunities for students to take these exams. The first opportunity is going to be what's known as school test day. So for the last couple of years, this has been offered at MELS. It's a chance for all students in the New York City Department of Education schools to take an official SAT during a school day. Most of the SAT exams are offered on Saturdays, so this is an exception to that rule. This year, the date is going to be April 13th, which is a Tuesday. Even if students are fully remote, they are still going to be welcome to come in to take that test in person. There is no remote version of the SATs. So if a student is at MELS in high school as a fully remote student, they will not be able to take that exam in a fully remote way. So it is an in-person only exam. But like I said, even if students are not attending MELS in person, they can still come in for that day to take the test. And Ms. Mills, if I say anything that's inaccurate, please correct me. Knowing that there are, rolling quarantines and there's like all sorts of reasons that dates don't work, and we all are like, having to be super flexible with schedules. There will also be a makeup date on April 27th. So if students are unable to attend on the 13th, they will have the opportunity to take that exam on the 27th of April instead. So those are the two opportunities to do this in-school test day. The benefit of in-school test day, there are a number of benefits to taking the test through this in-school test day. A, they get to take it at MELS, at a site that's comfortable for them, with people who are familiar to them. B, they get to take it on a weekday and not have to take it on a weekend. And then it is free for everybody. And students are automatically registered. So I do believe Ms. Mills will survey students to see who intends to come in so that she can make sure that she's got enough staff members. But students do not need to register themselves to take the test. They have already been registered by our school. So those are 4 important benefits of engaging in school test day if the student chooses to take the test. But you can see this bullet point, it is optional. The school will be following all of the DOE health and safety protocol, including making sure that the classrooms are set up so that students are distanced from each other. Mask wearing will be required. All of the safety precautions that we have in place for a regular school day will be in place, for this exam. And specific details about the exact schedule and, when and where students should show up, all of that will follow later. So that's school test day. I'm just going to operate on the assumption that people will have questions. So,
yeah, Chris asked a question. Ms. Benzie. He says if we want to take the SAT, we should just go to MELS ? Chris, we totally can't tell you what to do. But what we can say is just emphasizing what Ms. Benzie said. It's a free option for everybody. Everyone's already registered. It's in your school building. At the same time, we very much respect and understand family choices of maybe not wanting to go in the building, and that is completely up to you and your family. We pushed it to the latest date possible. These are the latest options for us. You might have friends or know people at other schools who will be taking it in March. There is a March option, based on what's happening in the world and our city. We tried to push it off kind of as long as possible. But those are our 2 options. Yeah, Abigail Pena or Abigail's family. the 13th is there as an offering if students or families are in quarantine or something has come up and they're not able to be there on the 13th, then the 27th is also an option. You know, many know that our middle school is coming back in the building this week. So after we get our middle school kids in the building this week, I'll reach out to folks, maybe through your crew advisors, to do some of that surveying that Ms. Bensby's talking about, which is just, you know, folks' intention, what date they're coming in, so that we can plan accordingly. Okay, just really quick, sorry, those dates, and just if that's helpful, those aren't dates that we choose. Those are offered through College Board, just in case, you know, folks are like, can I come on the 15th? Like, just like Ms. Bensby mentioned at the very beginning, they're standardized, and that's being offered by College Board on those dates sort of across the board. So that's why we're working with those.
And then I'll tell you what your alternative is, and you can decide, you know, how appealing coming into MELS to take it versus taking it on what's known as a National Test Day is. So National Test Day is when the College Board and the ACTs offer the test. So these are all Saturday dates. The SATs, the dates are March 13th, May 8th, and June 5th. What you see in parentheses are the registration deadlines. So April 8th is the regular registration. April 27th is the late registration deadline. I won't read this all out loud to you. I will, after this meeting, send an email out to students and families with the slides from today and some links. So don't worry about capturing all of these specifics right now. But those are the offerings for the SATs, and then the ACTs are offered in April and June. So these are all Saturday test days. You should register, even though for May the deadline is April. I would actually recommend registering in advance of that. I think 2 months would be ideal. We do not offer these at MELS, so you would be taking them at a high school that does offer these national test days. When you go, so the other difference is that you have to register yourself through the website. You would either use the College Board website for the SATs or the ACT website for the ACTs. Students log in. If they don't have an account yet, they will need to create one. You pick the date that you're registering for, and then you pick your testing location. They'll give you a list of available sites. It's usually categorized by zip code. So those testing sites that come up will be the ones that are closest to home. You will think about how you intend to get there and what makes the most sense and is the most convenient. I usually have to be there at 7:45 on a Saturday morning, so keep that in mind. And that's basically it. You pick your site, you sign up. It is free for students who qualify for a fee waiver. You would qualify for a fee waiver if you were coded as eligible to receive free or reduced lunch. And the way we make that determination is based on the family income forms that you fill out at the beginning of the school year. This year, those forms were available on Operoo. So hopefully you have filled that out. And if you haven't, this is maybe like a plug to go ahead and do that, because that is that's how I am able to give or not give fee waivers. And Ms. Mills, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about that.
Nope. Actually, Dalen, that's a good question. Dalen asked how much the test cost. Do you know, Ms. Bensby, this year off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think it's about $37, $38 without the essay. The essay is also optional. Again, like, I'm not particularly worried about the essay this year. It was only ever a handful of colleges that needed it. And now that schools are testing optional across the board. But so I think it's like $38 without the essay and maybe $50 with the essay. Yeah. And if you are fee waiver eligible, you are able to take the exam 2 times for free. That's 2 times in addition to school test day. So you can take it in April with MELS, and then you can take it 2 more times without being charged a fee. If you are not eligible for a fee waiver, then you could take it for free with MELS in April, and then you would pay for any additional testing opportunities. And just so you know, the dates that I have posted here are the dates that are taking place this spring, but there are other opportunities for students to test in their senior year. So they will also be offered in October, November, and December of students' senior year. So spring of junior year is not the only opportunity. And we quite frequently have students who take the test once in their junior year and then will test for a second time in their senior year. December is the last opportunity for students to take the test before it is too late for college applications. And if anyone is thinking about applying to college through early applications, then November is usually your last opportunity. But it's not a junior only exam. Students will have the chance to test again in their senior year if they choose that. So that's National Test Day. It's a Saturday. You have to be there early. You pick the test site, not offered at Mel's, and you need to register for those exams at least 1 month prior, but my recommendation is 2 months prior, just so you can get the testing site that's the most convenient for you, especially because, like I said, I anticipate that there'll be fewer available seats, given that they cannot cram as many students into a room as they would have in a traditional year. So any questions about National Test Day? And hope that helps people think about, you know, how valuable school test day is versus national test day and what would work best for you.
Spencer, there was a quick
yeah.
question about how to access the fee waiver if kids need it, if they're registering on their own.
So it should automatically be applied to your account. I think we coded students. We actually coded students who were waiver eligible according to data that we had from the 10th grade PSAT. So if you received a fee waiver when you go to log in, that should automatically be there as part of your account. If it's not, but you know that you're eligible or costs are prohibitive for you and your family, you should email me and I will work with you to figure out what's going on. But they should kind of automatically populate into your College Board account when you log in.
I'll just pop in real quick. I'm actually hopping to another family meeting real quick, so I apologize. I'm about to leave, but want to address, Tommy, one of your questions, and it's clearly related. And folks have seen, I've been in touch with a lot of families and students, but folks have seen and unfortunately recognize that we do not have scores for our current 11th graders from their 10th grade PSAT that folks took on March 11th or 13th or whatever day that was. Unfortunately, in the way that is this year and a global pandemic, the city shut down right after folks took, I don't know if you guys remember, school shut down and the city shut down right after that. And within that transition, College Board stopped receiving packages at a certain amount of time. So our box of answer sheets did not make it before College Board stopped accepting answer sheets due to public health and COVID reasons. We unfortunately did not discover this until much later, until this fall. So unfortunately, that is why our current 10th graders do not have PSAT scores. Super frustrating. I know that our students sat for that exam. At the same time, that's why we want to make sure that we have opportunities for folks to take the SAT in person if you want to, if your families want to. So it took us a long time to discover what had happened. And I just want to empathize and recognize that that's frustrating. And also, no, they're not in a random shipping truck. It was that they got passed, by the time that our answer sheets got there, College Board had cut off in early April. They'd cut off receiving any tests from anywhere. So it was really poor timing. It was in combination of New York City shutting down, College Board setting their policies and procedures. You know, it's of no faults here. It was of no student fault, no teacher fault, but just really bad timing. So I just wanted to let folks know when you log into College Board, if you're registering for future SATs or looking for fee waivers, that's why they're not there. Yeah, we'll be in touch about future information for April, but be on the lookout for a survey from us, an interest survey, if you are able and willing and want to come in for those test days, okay?
Ms. Mills, even though PSAT scores are not going to be available, would we think fee waivers would, because we still coded students who are waiver eligible?
We did. We coded those students right after they took that exam.
Okay.
So yeah, they should all be in there. If something looks weird, please, reach out to us right away.
Yeah, if anyone, if cost is a hardship and you anticipate that you should have a fee waiver, don't go ahead and pay if you think you should. Correct. And you don't, reach out to me and we'll see what we can do and see what's going on with that.
Yeah, so a couple questions. Unfortunately, they will not get their PSAT scores. That's a decision that College Board made when our answer sheets got there after their deadline, their sort of cutoff. They did not get lost. They just, in the way that, our school building shut down, UPS was the ones taking our answer sheets back and forth. It was unfortunately a perfect storm. The National Merit Scholarship is not used for 10th grade PSATs. So those are not linked, but you might have heard that that's true, but those are not linked. But yeah, they did not get lost. They weren't on a truck, they made it, but unfortunately the timing was unfortunate. There's a question in there that says, due to COVID hardship, would they consider that? Is that pertaining to fee waivers? That's a good question, Ms. Benzie. Do you know that? Is there, like, if there was a family who, according to the income verification at the beginning of the year, might not, but then
Mhm.
that's a good question.
Yeah, I'm sure we can figure something out. I don't know exactly what like the, step 1, step 2, step 3 of the process is going to be, but if that situation applies and financial situation has changed, send me an email and I can reach out to the College Board and we'll figure out how to get a code that the student can use. So if it's not automatically showing up in the account, I can always get a code and we can kind of like plug that in by hand to help with the cost. So yeah, please email me. And I can drop my email if you don't have it in the chat bar as well when I'm done with the presentation. All right, Ms. Mills, thank you.
Good night, all.
All right, so just a couple of additional things that I want to touch on for everybody, and then I will take any remaining questions. So test prep opportunities. Every year, MELS has facilitated a course for our students. So of course, students can go out and find a course in their local neighborhoods, or they can find a tutor to help them with the test. We try to provide an opportunity or an option for students that's a little bit lower cost than what you might find at some of like the testing centers like Kaplan or Princeton Review. Those tend to be very small courses and therefore the costs are much higher. So what we provide through MELS is a larger course. It's through a company called A-List. We worked with them last year. We had a really good experience with them last year. The cost for students, and again, this is optional. It's only if students would like to engage in this opportunity, but it's $360 per student. The course includes 10 taught sessions as well as 3 practice exams. The first practice exam is actually scheduled to begin to take place this Saturday. So, and if anyone's like, I really want my student to take this course, but we were not prepared for the test to be this Saturday, I think that they will be flexible with you. So don't take that as a reason not to partake. We can work with them, particularly because everything is virtual and students are logging in online to take the test. I'm sure that we could be flexible if needed. But the goal was to time this course so that it ends right before that April 13th test day, because the assumption is that's when the majority of our students are going to be sitting for the SATs, and we want them to be prepared in time for that. So because of that, the course needs to begin rather quickly so that students can get all of their instruction on time for that April 13th exam. But there will be 3 practice tests. This will give students an opportunity to get a baseline score, to see how they progress, and then they will take a final practice test like a week to a week and a half before sitting for the official SAT. So that's the design of the course. It's going to be offered on Mondays and Wednesdays after school. It's entirely virtual. There's an online platform that students will use to access practice questions, and they will have a live teacher who will be teaching it, via this platform that the company uses. So if people are interested in enrolling their students, the course will only run if we have a minimum of 11 students signed up. I think I currently have 6 students who expressed interest. Every year we're like hoping that we get enough students, and every year we have been able to get the minimum number of students to run the course. But if we have anywhere between 11 students on the low end and 25 students on the high end, we'll be able to run the course. If we have more than 25 students, we will split it into 2 separate courses. So as long as we have 11 students signed up, we will be able to run this program. There was a survey sent out to families via MailChimp. I will send it again if folks are looking for it. It's just a place for you to say that you're interested. And for everyone who lets me know they're interested, I will send a follow-up email tomorrow with the schedule, with the flyer, and with instructions to register. Payments will have to be made in person because the school accepts cash and money order only. And Ms. Soto would be the person to reach out to. She will set up an appointment. People will come in, we'll keep everyone distance, everyone will have masks on, and you'll make the money exchange with her, in order to enroll. I think it's okay if you want your student to start the course, but you're unable to make payment until next week. I recognize that this is a very quick turnaround time, and you might not be able to get into the school in person to pay Ms. Soto prior to next week. So at the moment, my main thing that I want to communicate is if you intend to register your student, please fill out the survey so that I can capture your email address and I can reach out to you with next steps and more information. For those of you who are not interested in the A-List course, Khan Academy is actually an amazing free online resource for students. I have recommended it in non-COVID years, but with there being limited in-person opportunities, I think Khan Academy has become an even more valuable tool. They have free online test prep, free full-length tests. So particularly because students do not have access to PSAT scores this year, they can go take a full-length test online and receive a score for that to get an idea of how they are doing. There are topic-specific lessons, practice sections, strategies. It's like a very rich online prep that is free for every New York City DOE student. And the link is contained in this presentation. So when I send it out following this meeting, you'll have access to it, but I will also drop that in the chat bar for anyone who wants to look into that. So those are two test prep opportunities that I think are worth students taking advantage of. If you're looking for a smaller or more intimate setting, or a one-on-one tutor, I don't really have anyone that I can recommend, but I know that a lot of that exists. So certainly you're welcome to find some support to help your student prepare outside of these two offerings. But these are two that I'd like to share with you. And then I guess last but not least is questions and answers. Everyone has done a really great job of containing their questions to testing questions. Just a quick reminder, let's try and keep the questions relevant to testing for today, and I will do a much more in-depth like college applications thing in a month or two. I'm going to stop screen sharing just so that I can see the chat bar for those of you who feel more comfortable using it. But also, like I said, please feel free to just ask your questions out loud.
I said something in the chat like, will these slides be shared with us, to us?
Yep. Yes, they will. So my intention is to send through MailChimp all of this information. I have a college office website. I don't know if the juniors are familiar with it yet, but I will post the slides to that website, and I will also share it on Google Classroom for the class of 2022. So I will make it available through multiple platforms for everybody.
Then like something that I said before, like how does grading or knowingly scoring work on the SAT exam? What grade is considered a passing or failing for the SAT exam?
Okay, yeah, those are good questions. So there is no passing or failing grade on the SAT, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the way the SAT is scored is there's two sections. There's the EWBR, it's evidence-based reading and writing. So the EBRW, which is basically like the reading passages where you answer questions about the content that you've read, and that's scored. It's from a 200 to an 800. So an 800 is the highest score you can earn, and 200 is the lowest score you can earn. And then there's a math section, and the scoring system is the same. It's 200 to 800. So the highest score a student can earn in total is a 1600. 400 is the lowest score that a student can earn. There is no passing or failing of the SAT, and students often ask me what a good score on the SAT is. And that is a hard question to answer as well, because a good score is a score that puts you at or above the average admitted student at the college you are interested in. And that can look very different. If you're a student who is interested in Ivy League schools, the average applicant or the average admitted student probably has an SAT score that is between a 1450 and a 1600. So, for students who have Ivy League aspirations, a good score is a score that is, very high on that spectrum. For a student who is looking at, a school whose average SAT score is 1,000, and there are quite a number of schools out there whose average SAT score ranges between 1,000 and 1,100, then a good score would be something in that range. So it's really comparing yourself to the schools that you are interested in and that you are excited about attending. And then also just keeping in mind that with there being so many students applying testing optional, that in some ways it's irrelevant this year. Because I have had students, whose GPAs are a good academic match for the colleges that they're excited about. And if their SAT scores are not a good match, then they're choosing to apply testing optional. So the message that I would communicate is that a good score is the best that you can do. And if you still feel like that score is not one that you're proud of, or it's not one that's gonna strengthen your application, or it's not one that's gonna benefit your application to a particular college, then those would be instances in which you would choose to apply testing optional, and you just would not share those scores with the college.
Okay. And then another thing that I asked, like, is should I reach out to certain teachers to understand how to solve problems in the SAT, like algebra, which was the most confusing part to me in the PSAT exam that I took.
You could, but the thing that I will say, I mean, the teacher certainly, like, you know, your algebra teacher certainly knows algebra and can probably help you figure out how to answer questions if you had specific questions. But they're not necessarily experts on the SAT and the type of questions that the SAT asks. So I would suggest, you know, you could certainly reach out to teachers if you were doing some work on your own using Khan Academy, for example. But you couldn't quite understand why something was the way it was. You know, you could probably go to them during office hours or send them an email and they can try and help you work through that. But they're not the experts on SAT questions per se. So I would definitely say to start with Khan Academy. They do all sorts of explanatory videos about different concepts, and I've used them before for myself, and they're super helpful. So I would start with that. And if those videos are not helping it to click in and those kind of tools are not helping it to click in, you know, then you could ask your teachers, but they don't have a lot of resources specific to the SATs because that's not what they teach. If that makes sense. I got a question about the SAT is on the 13th or the 27th, depending on the day, is free and you're automatically registered. So that is accurate. And if you choose to take it a second time, then you would need to, so if you choose to take it a second time, that would be through this National Test Day on a Saturday, you would need to register for it. And if you were not eligible for a fee waiver, then it would be something that you would need to pay for. If you are fee waiver eligible, you would not have to pay for it, but you still would have to register to take it. So I hope that that clarifies the question that I received in the chat.
And also, like, if you know, like, what time will like the SAT in person start, and what time should I be there to school by?
So that's Ms. Mills is going to get back to us about that particular level of detail. I know in the past it started at like 9:30, so it's a little bit later than it starts on a Saturday, but I can't tell you. They may have, you know, depending on how many students take it, they may have to offer a morning session and an afternoon session because, again, like we're operating in a totally different situation where we can't pack a classroom anymore. So I really can't answer that question at this point, but that's one of the things that Ms. Mills is going to be working on and she's going to get back to us about. I got a question about SAT practice books. That's a really good question. Off the top of my head, I can recommend some. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the names, but I'm happy to include that in the follow-up email that I send. It can give some practice books that you all can purchase through, you know, Amazon or a bookstore. And I think that that's another valuable way to do some studying. So I will include that in my follow-up email. There was one more question in the chat bar, and I'm curious about how many students this impacts. Someone had mentioned that their student was currently enrolled, I'm assuming in College Now courses. It's a partnership that we have with Queens College, where students can take a college credited course through the local CUNY schools. And I'm actually curious to see how many people that schedule impacts. If there are a lot of people that are interested in the prep course, but who have a Monday, Wednesday conflict, it is possible for us to potentially move the date of those courses. They're sort of working with us. So it doesn't have to be Monday, Wednesdays. We can aim for Tuesday, Thursdays if that's something that's like impacting a large number of people who would like to enroll their student. So if that impacts you and you would otherwise like to register your student, feel free to drop it in the chat bar. You can send it to me as a direct message if you don't want to make that information public, or you can email me. And if there's enough students who would benefit from having us move the course, I can talk to them about the possibility of getting an instructor on alternative days. And I have a question about qualifying for the fee waiver. So that has to do with whether you as a family were on the free or reduced lunch list when your student was in 10th grade. And this is a little bit confusing because all students receive free lunch. Every New York City DOE student gets free lunch. So if they walked into the cafeteria, and they want to get school lunch, that lunch is going to be given to them without pay. So sometimes students are like, well, I get free lunch, I must be on the free lunch list. So confusingly, those two things are separate. Everyone gets free lunch because the city is financing that. But there is also a free or reduced lunch list, which is based on household income. And that is reported through the family income survey that is given to parents at the beginning of the school year. In previous years, it was sent home by your child's career advisor, and this past school year, it was available through Aparoo. So the same place that you would have filled out your blue card, that form was available, and I believe is still available. If this sounds unfamiliar and you don't think you filled it out, but you would like to because you believe that you're going to be waiver eligible, I would reach out to your child's career advisor and just find out how you can go about accessing that form. It's called the family. I'm going to put some information in the chat. Address. If you don't have it, the name of that form is the family income. Hey, baby. Okay, so that's the website for the SATs, the website for the ACTs, my email address, and the name of that form. Is there anything else that I should be putting in the chat bar? I feel like I'm forgetting something. Feel free to remind me. Yeah, so the survey so someone asked me about the MailChimp survey. Are you referring to the survey about whether students were going to be engaging in school test day, or the one about whether they wanted to participate in the SAT prep course? The SAT prep course was definitely sent out through MailChimp. It was sent out, I think, twice. I can send it out again. Or if you didn't get it, sometimes parents, for whatever reason, are not receiving messages through MailChimp. So if that applies to you, you can also just using the email address for me that I dropped in, you can let me know and I can always send the survey to you directly, because we did send it out twice. And if you didn't receive it through MailChimp, me sending it a third time through MailChimp is probably not going to help you. So I would check your inbox, see if you missed it. And if you didn't, send me an email and I'll just send it to you directly. And then there was a question further up in the chat bar that I missed. Someone asked if we had to pay for lunch prior to getting free lunch, we would not be qualified for the waiver. Yeah, whether or not you get free lunch when you go to the cafeteria is irrelevant. The fee waiver is for students who are coded as being eligible for free or reduced. So it's all based on household income. Again, that's through the family income form. And like someone asked earlier, if the household financial situation has changed as a result of COVID and you have not gone back and redone that family income form, but you believe you are now waiver eligible, please jbensby@metropolitanls.com and I will work with you individually. All right, I know that there are a number of people we've gone over, so I'm gonna end the meeting, especially for those of you who want to get to the PTA meeting. But this is just like the beginning of, me communicating with parents and communicating with students. So feel free to send me emails to follow up with any individual questions. I hope that this was helpful and I look forward to getting to know everyone better and working with you all more closely. I will be in community meeting for students on Friday. So for students that were here, you're going to get a lot of these same details again. Right. Thanks, everybody.